Hi everyone, welcome to another Hatton's Model Railways live stream, and today we're giving you another set of formations for the modellers who choose to model Era 7 in the 1970s in the western region of England. Now, this is a part of the UK's railway scene that underwent a huge amount of change in a very short period of time. So we'll be covering some of the different locomotives that you can pick up in double O gauge and operate layouts such as these with locos in your collection too. If you've got any particular questions, please do ask them in the chat and I'll answer as many as I can do throughout the stream. Otherwise, keep an eye on the show and we'll be covering many different locomotive types, quite a few bits of history, and showing you some of the great models that are out there at the moment. As ever, click the link in the description and you will see a full formations guide already available. I've got a quick snippet of this here, and this gives you some great options and opportunities for featuring locos you may already have on your layout and in your collection from around 1972, 1973, right up until the early 1980s on the Western region. And as we've already mentioned, this was a huge time for change. Since the 1960s, the Western region had used its own distinct diesel locomotives. The Western hydraulics were unlike anything else used on the system of the whole British rail network, with locomotives famed and well known by enthusiasts such as the Class 52 Westerns that we see here, the Class 35 Hymex, and the Class 42 and 43 warships. However, their days were numbered. They were now viewed as non-standard and their days in the fleet were numbered. But we can enter the early 1970s formations with quite a few operations for the Class 42, the Class 52 and the Hymex that we mentioned previously. These locomotives only generally had vacuum brakes and they didn't have any train heating other than the outdated steam heating system. So you wouldn't see them with the more modern coaches. But throughout the 1970s, especially the Westerns were used with the earlier Mark I and Mark II vehicles on trains heading through the southwest of England, either interregional services or secondary passenger duties. By this time, the warships had mainly been displaced, with these locomotives mainly disappearing by the end of 1972, but there was a small chance to see some of the locomotives there on different duties across the network. But our main focus on the hydraulics within this period is the Westerns that we see on the screen here. And of course, the Hymex diesel locomotives, the Bobo Type 3 version 2. Now, the Hymex really weren't passenger locomotives at this time. They had been displaced from their passenger duties and they were mainly seen on secondary freight traffic, such as some China clay workings, some engineers trip workings, and there was still quite a lot of milk traffic in the region too. We can see here a train with a Class 47 locomotive and some six-wheel milk tankers. You can pick up these models from the likes of Hornby or Dapol in quite a few different colour schemes, although by this time they had lost a lot of the branding and were mainly in either rusty or plain black liveries to suit. One thing you'll see from this era is there's a lot of BR blue rolling stock. This livery really had come into place by the early 1970s. And heading back over to the snip from our formations guide, you can see this even from the versions there at the top with our Class 52 and Class 35 locomotives and a full rake of BR blue and grey Mark Is behind them. So you can really see towards the start and the middle of the 1970s, we're still sticking with these earlier coach vehicles and still have a lot of the Western hydraulic fleet in service across various freight and passenger duties. One of the setups I've got in front of me here shows that this area, being a popular tourist spot within the UK, seeing many beaches and towns along the coastlines of Devon and Cornwall, saw a huge amount of motor rail traffic. This is vehicles such as the car flat that I'm pulling up on the screen for you now, which would be loaded with people's cars to save them having to drive down the motorways and twisty roads down to the southwest, and depositing the cars at their holiday destinations. These were very regular appearances in the summer, and we have a full rake on our formations guide on the website for you. But to demonstrate this today in double O gauge form, I've got a Dapol Western locomotive here a Hornby Mark 1 in the blue-grey livery behind it, and then the Oxford Rail car flat wagon, which is available right now. So you can set up one of these holiday trains running into or out of the southwest. Although they did mainly run from the likes of London down to places such as St Austell and Newquay, they did also run from outside the region from places further afield, such as Birmingham. But they're a really great installation, and towards the start of the 1970s and into the mid-1970s, you can still use the classic Western hydraulic diesels on these particular services. But other items were coming through. The modernisation of the railways was really taking place, and even the Western hydraulics couldn't escape from this. Despite them being very popular locomotives and well liked by their crews in the region, standardisation was required. And as we look down our list there, as the dates change, heading up through 1976, 1978, there we start to get a bit of variety in our locomotives. There's one for you there, Onno, just towards the bottom that you can see. If you have a look there at the HST that we have in our formation. And that was then coming in, but with a little bit to go before the HST was introduced. So we'll work our way up towards the introduction of the iconic Intercity 125. A lot of the expresses in the region were started to initially be replaced with Class 47 locomotives, as you see here. And this is a very late survivor indeed in the original two-tone green livery that we see there. In around 1975, 1976, some of these locomotives did survive in this original colour scheme, but they were very few and far between indeed. But again, if you don't want to be our blue locomotive, there's some great opportunities there to get one of these items onto your layout. So the Hymex had gone by the start of 1975, and it was just 2 more years for the Western locomotives. These iconic hydraulic diesels had been withdrawn by the start of 1977, and other locomotives had been drafted in to replace them. One of the main replacements was the Class 50. These locomotives had previously been used on the West Coast Main Line between Crewe and Glasgow, but the electrification of this route meant that the full fleet was available to be transferred to the Western region and replace some of the earlier Western hydraulic locomotives. You'll notice on the bottom right of the front of this locomotive, there's a little orange jumper cable with a white light on it. And this is a really important part of why the Class 50s started to revolutionise the services down here. And this was their electric capability. They were able to supply electric heating and electric train supply to our locomotive, to our trains. So you could then get the air-conditioned vehicles, which were being introduced as the later Mark II coaches. And we can bring in here our Hornby Class 50, which has been made in the condition perfect for you 1970s modelers out there. And either the Hornby or the Bachmann or the previous Earthix, if you still have them around, air-conditioned Mark II coaches. So this was a real world apart from the express services previously that had ran with the earlier Mark I and Mark II rolling stock and a Western hydraulic diesel. So these started to come in around 1975, 1976, and we can see again on our formations diagram there, we have a Plymouth to Paddington working in 1978 with a Class 50 and a full suite of Mark II vehicles. You'll notice that a couple of Mark 1s still are in there to cover for the catering vehicles and the full luggage vehicles that weren't available in Mark IIs. So a couple of the Mark 1s still remained on, but by this time the express services from London to the south of England, to the southwest of England, sorry, were in the hands of the Class 50 locomotives and the Mark II coaches. Trains still came in from all other parts of the UK with some cross-country services running from quite far away, with destinations such as Newcastle, Liverpool, and indeed in some occasions Scotland, served by services into the southwest of England. These often changed locomotives as they came through the country, but by the time they made it onto the western region, these were commonly operated by Class 45 and Class 46 peak diesel locomotives. of which I have a model here. There is a forthcoming model, of course, by Helgen, which is looking fantastic and scheduled for release in 2021. But we've got here the Bachmann model, which is available occasionally on our pre-owned department if you do want to check that one out. So these locomotives weren't really based in the Western region, although a number of them were allocated to Bristol for use on these cross-country services. So our expresses are still in the hands of the Class 50. We've lost the Western hydraulics now. They've gone by 1977. A fleet of other smaller diesels has been brought in from other parts of the network. We can see here on our diagram, we've got Class 25 locomotives and Class 31s making their first appearances in the southwest of England. But we've still not mentioned that HST. These were some of the first high-speed trains to be brought out and used in Britain, being introduced in the southwest of England in the late 1970s. The Class 50s and the Mark II coaches weren't initially seen as a stopgap, but when this service could be revolutionised by the HST, it was done very quickly indeed. And the Class 50s remained, but were mainly transferred onto secondary passenger duties around the region. So the HST really took hold of the express traffic that operated in the region, mainly running from the likes of London Paddington down to Exeter and Penzance, but other services again coming into and out of the region were occasionally operated by the HST too. So, of course, we've got the Hornby HST, which is available in this particular livery. It is quite hard to find in the original Western region numbered colour scheme, as you see here, but they do come up from time to time on our pre-owned section, so I would recommend keeping an eye out on the locomotives that are out there that come through. So we've really changed now. We've done pretty much a complete resweep of the locomotives that we started off with. We've no longer got the diesel hydraulics. They've disappeared now, and they've been replaced by a fully modern fleet of locomotives such as the Class 50s and the high-speed trains, which are really starting to revolutionise the express services. But what about freight, and what about some of the local passenger duties? Now, there are still loco hauled passenger duties, especially some of these secondary services. We see a Paignton to Exeter service in 1982 with just 3 Mark I carriages and a Class 31 locomotive. We see a service running the other way just towards the top of our diagram there in 1976 with a similar rake of coaches and a Class 25 diesel at the front. The Devon and Cornwall area is known for a lot of small branches serving destinations such as St Ives and Falmouth, and these have been regularly served by multiple units, and in a lot of cases single car multiple units, as we can see here with Dapol's Class 122. These saw service from the mid-1970s right through until the early 1990s, so perfectly appropriate for our region and our timescale in either the BR blue colour scheme that you can see here, or indeed the blue and grey colour scheme, working from some of the mainline stations down the branch lines and serving the branch lines of the southwest of England. When it comes over to freight, we've already had a look at some of the traditional traffic that ran in the area, with the milk trains that we see here largely being withdrawn by the late 1970s, but a huge amount of China clay traffic remained, bringing that out of the southwest of England and reporting it further into the UK, so taking it to destinations far and wide. Whilst a lot of locomotives handled this, again, in the earlier eras, it was home of the Hymec locomotives, showing you here this Helgen model, which is one of their most recent releases. And again, check out the link in the description if you want to see the full range of Hymecs that we do have available at the moment. But once these locomotives are gone by 1975, locos such as the Class 47, Class 31, Class 25 really took their home on some of these freight services. A couple of Class 37s were trialled at this time, but they really didn't come into the region in big numbers until just after our area we're covering today in the mid-1980s. But one last little operation I want to show you today is a really simple setup. It's our usual Class 08 shunter. And whilst I've only got the one China clay wagon today, it would be around 6 or 7 of these and a brake van to the rear. Now, not all of the China clay dryeries were able to be served by full working lines. Some of these were at the end of very small branch lines requiring small steam locomotives and these four-wheel goods wagons to work down them in the days of steam. And a lot of the larger diesel locomotives weren't able to get down these branches. Now, some of these branches were actually operated quite considerable distances, up to 10 or 15 miles in some cases, with 08 shunting locomotives and these four-wheel wagons, because they were the only things that were actually allowed to work down some of these routes. And these lines, such as to destinations including Wenford Bridge, operated until the mid-1980s. So a Class 08 shunter, maybe on a small diorama or arriving at a station with some of the China clay wagons, which you can pick up from the likes of Bachmann or Dapol. Of course, the 08 is available in Hornby's range in a variety of colour schemes too. Really gives a bit of an unusual twist to some of the freight. And indeed, a lot of the freight services such as this lasted longer in the Western region than they did in other parts of the world. If you have a look again at our diagram on the website, you'll see trains such as this milk train with appropriate diagrams and links to models that are available too. But it's really worth having a look at what is available for this era. There's some fantastic models that are available right now or come up from time to time on our pre-owned selection. We've got locomotives such as the Class 31, and we've mentioned today the Class 45s and the Class 25s, which came into the region, both of which are the subject of a brand new model, which will be available next year by Helgen. But there's some great things to model, whether it's holiday trains, such as our Western with the motor rail traffic, whether we've got a rake of the cement wagons, as we see here, hauled appropriately by maybe a warship locomotive, a high mech, or one of the later diesel locomotives that came in to replace these. There's some great options and opportunities to model a really mixed set of items if you are choosing to recreate the 1970s scene in the southwest of England. And maybe you are a fan of those Western hydraulic locomotives. There's quite a few of you out there, I'm certain of that. But at the same time, for traction variety, there really isn't anywhere that rivals this in around the mid-1970s. With the hydraulic locomotives, as we see here, English electric locomotives such as the Class 50 and the Class 08, and then heading over to the Sulzer and British Rail design locomotives such as the Class 45s, 46s, 47s, and even more. And not forgetting, of course, one of the original stomping grounds of the HST, introduced in the late 1970s and transforming services in this region to be faster and more reliable than they had been before. So I hope you've enjoyed today's session. I hope you've learned a little bit more and got some true inspiration on modeling this particular era. If you want to see some more, click that link in the description and you'll see even more formations diagrams. This is just a very small part of what we've got available on our website, and you'll get links through to completely appropriate models that are available right now too. All of the models I've got here today and I've shown here today are available either as brand new stock or through our second-hand pre-owned department. So check those out on our website if you'd like to pick up a model of a certain locomotive or fill a gap in a Western region collection that you have already got underway on your layout. So I hope you've enjoyed today's session. I hope you've learned a little bit of something. If you have enjoyed it, don't hesitate to subscribe to our YouTube channel and like our Facebook page. We've got a few more formations guides videos on there, with more to come in the future. We've got our ever popular skills cast sessions where you can learn a lot about detailing and amending your rolling stock and model railway. And of course, we'll keep you posted about all the latest model railway news on there too. Otherwise, thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye.